Welcome into this special edition of the Fast Lane. Trey Lyle here with you. I'm joined by the voice of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, Andy Demetra. Andy, let's jump right into this game as Georgia Tech gets the first game in the Coastal for Commonwealth teams, as obviously they play Virginia and Virginia Tech every year, but heading into a major Coastal game against, I guess, one of the favorites in the Coastal Division. Who knows? Obviously, Pitt is kind of has a 2-game lead as they sit right now, but they've only played 2 Coastal games. But Virginia has looked really good of late. Both teams coming off a win against Duke, Georgia Tech coming off the bye. So let's just jump right in. Year 3 for Jeff Collins. A big thing about is, reconnecting to Atlanta and obviously bringing in some talented quarterbacks, which is something, it's completely different from the triple option days. And Jeff Sims appears to be the guy. He played a little bit during the COVID year, but this is still a true freshman. And he's developed a lot throughout the season and has played well, especially, in that North Carolina game.
Yeah, we're seeing the growth and maturity of Jeff Sims. Last year, he started game 1 and won that first career start on the road at Florida State. So he set a pretty high bar for himself. He showed his toughness. It was not always the most forgiving of situations for Jeff based on the defenses he was facing, but I think you saw a lot of that raw potential in Jeff. And what we're seeing now in year 2 for him, even though he's still technically listed as a freshman because everybody can play an additional year due to COVID, his completion percentage has gone up. I think he's savvier in his pre-snap reads. And as we saw in Georgia Tech's last game versus Duke, he has a lot of moxie in being able to lead his team under adverse circumstances and take them down the field. He's a dynamic player with his ability not only to hit the ball deep, but also to break off runs with his legs. And Georgia Tech fans, rightfully so, should be very excited about what the future holds for this offense under the direction of Jeff Sims.
And you talk about the offense. They also have some good weapons on the outside. The running back has appeared to improve, which, obviously Georgia Tech has always had a really good running game because they were in the triple option. But, receivers, it's weird to say that Georgia Tech is known for wide receivers. You look at Demaryius Thomas and obviously Calvin Johnson, given its somewhat recent history. But how you seen the development of the skill positions as, this is like a very unique coaching challenge that Jeff Collins has that really, no coach has undertaken in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL right now, well, he was a wide receiver at Georgia Tech, but he's a tight end in the NFL, Darren Waller. He's another Georgia Tech grad and former wide receiver on the flats. You're right. If there was one position group outside of tight end, because the position didn't exist in the Paul Johnson age, that Georgia Tech needed an infusion of talent quickly, it was at wide receiver. And they've been very good in developing the players that they inherited while also recruiting guys who fit the spread pro-style system that they wanted to run. Kyrick McGowan has come in as a grad transfer from Northwestern, had a big over-the-shoulder touchdown catch versus Duke. He's been a very versatile, crisp route runner, and really their number one target this season. So he's been immediate help out of the transfer portal. You look at some other guys like Malachi Carter, who's gotten incrementally better every year he's been at Tech. And Adonicus Sanders, the hero of the Duke game, somebody, again, who's just been very steady and has slowly built his niche in the wide receiving corps. So, yeah, they do have more weapons now, certainly than the first couple of years after Jeff Collins took over the program. And I think that also correlates to the improved efficiency that you're seeing from Jeff Sims.
Yeah, and we talk about this. This is going to be a big game for this Georgia Tech offense facing the best passer in the country in terms of yards at Brennan Armstrong. How important will it be for Georgia Tech to kind of keep pace with UVA? I know Georgia Tech's defense has been really good this season, but Virginia is still an offense that's able to strike quickly and able to put up points.
Yeah, I mean, how about this? In the Coastal Division, the top 2 quarterbacks in the division are probably not Sam Howell or De'Ara King.
Yeah.
And who in preseason would not have said those 2 guys are the best signal callers in the division? Instead, it's Kenny Pickett, who I think is the real deal, and then Brennan Armstrong, and his numbers speak for themselves. As far as Georgia Tech and its ability to hang points with Virginia, a couple of things I think need to happen. Number one, they have to reestablish their running game. They've suffered from some injuries and some inconsistency on the offensive line. That bye week came at a very opportune time for Georgia Tech because they haven't had the chemistry and the continuity they would have liked because of injuries befalling different guys at different times in the first half of the season. And Virginia, even though they did a really good job stifling Mateo Durant Duke's rushing game as a whole last Saturday, they are still last in the ACC in yards per carry allowed. So I think Georgia Tech, to unlock the full potential of this offense, we've seen teams really stack the box and put an extra hat over the center to try to subdue Jahmyr Gibbs and Jordan Mason. And the last few weeks, it's worked. If Georgia Tech can get that rolling, I think it'll open up the rest of the field for them. Play a little more ball control, which might make an offense like Virginia's a little more uncomfortable. And also, they have to capitalize inside the red zone. I know that's a prerequisite anytime you want to win on the road. Virginia's red zone touchdown percentage defense is among the best in the ACC. In fact, I think it's second in the ACC behind Clemson, which shows you how good the Cavaliers are once opponents get inside their 20. And Georgia Tech has struggled for stretches this year at cashing in. They got better versus Duke, but there was a period at the beginning of the year where they were really struggling once they got inside the opponent's, not even 20, inside the 30 or 40-yard line. It's one thing to create opportunities. It's another thing altogether to cash in on them. And if you want to beat an offense that can be as prolific and dynamic as Virginia, if you do get inside the red zone, you have to make sure you come away with points. And so I know that'll be a huge priority for Georgia Tech if it wants to author an upset in Charlottesville on Saturday.
Yeah, you touched on my final question when it came to the offense, the importance of the running game. And, in particular with Jeff Sims, like his best game rushing was against North Carolina, which was probably the team's best performance this season. And you look at, Malik Cunningham had a lot of success. The Miami quarterback had a lot of success. I think the third stringer, he was able to break off some big runs, and that guy wasn't as mobile as, De'Ara King being in there. But it appears that not just the running backs, but quarterbacks have had success running the football against this defense. So how big of a challenge would that be for Jeff Sims, to pair with the running game, running backs like you talked about?
Oh, I think it'll be huge. And Jeff Sims still leads Georgia Tech in rushing yards per game. I think some of the zone read, RPO stuff will be on display on Saturday night in Charlottesville. The numbers for Jahmyr Gibbs and Jordan Mason, they don't look spectacular. And I think, some Georgia Tech fans may look at those raw numbers and say, well, those guys have underperformed this year. I think a couple of things are in play. Number one, you have a viable running threat at quarterback in Jeff Sims, so there are only so many rushing attempts to go around per game. Georgia Tech truly rotates its backs between Gibbs, Mason, and Dante Smith, who, as the so-called number 3 back, is still averaging close to 7 yards a carry. And also Jeff Collins considers those flat passes and wheel routes an extension of the running game. Jahmyr Gibbs has actually led Tech in receiving yards each of the last 2 games. But Jeff Collins doesn't necessarily classify those yards as receiving yards. He considers those an extension of rushing yards. But you're right. If Jeff Sims can weaponize himself with those design quarterback runs like he did versus North Carolina in the second half of that game, I think it'll be a huge element that Georgia Tech will need if it wants to compete and defeat Virginia.
And going to the other side of the ball, looking at this Georgia Tech defense, they've around a little over 300 yards per game, 228 in the air. And that's pretty good considering how the evolution of college football has been. This defense, you could argue, has probably made more growth with Jeff Collins since he's been there. Granted, it was probably a little bit easier of a transition compared to the offense. But how big of a challenge, or at least what have you seen from this defense that gives you kind of a sense of how they'll be able to face, this prolific, very versatile offense that Virginia can bring?
Well, a couple of things, Trey. Number one, Georgia Tech has an experienced back four between Trey Swilling and Zamari Walton, Wanya Thomas and Tariq Carpenter at safety. Wesley Walker, who plays the nickel, also rotates for them at safety. You have guys with more than 100 combined career starts. If you look at the number of returning starts among safeties and corners, Georgia Tech had as many as any returning Power 5 secondary this year. And when you're facing somebody who's a sniper in the pocket like Brennan Armstrong, that should give you confidence that even though they will be assaulted snap after snap with passing situations, that it's not going to faze them or fluster them. Secondly, Georgia Tech has really rangy linebackers. AC Lee, Quez Jackson, Charlie Thomas have been terrific and maybe the best part of this Georgia Tech defense this year. Jackson is number 1 in the ACC in tackles per game. Ely, who is a transfer from Maryland, is number 2. So those guys can cover in space. They can provide run support, and they're rangy. They can get sideline to sideline. And when you have an offense that's predicated on a lot of quick throws, such as Virginia, you need those linebackers to cover on the perimeter and wrap up in the open field against wide receivers. And Jackson and Ely and Thomas have shown the ability to do so. But I think what it all boils down to more than that, Trey, is Georgia Tech needs to have an effective pass rush. They did that versus Sam Howell. They didn't do that versus Kenny Pickett. And they had 2 opposite results in those games. Against Gunnar Holmberg and Duke, they only sacked him 1 time, probably could have pressured him more than what they ultimately did. But they need to find a way to influence the pocket on Brennan Armstrong, because if you give him time to just stand in, let his receivers develop their routes, let him go through his reads, he's just throwing BDs, and it could be a very long day. So I think that's probably the formula for Georgia Tech. They are an upgraded defense from the last couple of years, which as a defensive guru, that's just how Jeff Collins likes it.
Yeah, you touched on it perfectly. And again, I won't let you give a prediction, but I will say the spread in this game is 7, favoring the Cavaliers. 62 is the over. But just before we let you go, couple overall keys that you want to see, from the Yellow Jackets that might lend towards an upset in Charlottesville come Saturday.
Yeah, and look, Georgia Tech has lost 12 of its last 14 at Scott Stadium, and that's one thing that Georgia Tech fans lament is some of the tortured, checkered history they've had going back the last decade plus in Charlottesville. For Georgia Tech, they have to play clean football offensively. Sometimes Jeff Sims has had issues with interceptions in road ACC games, although it's still admittedly a modest sample size. But you can't have empty possessions against Virginia. You can't bless them with short fields from turnovers, or else the job becomes that much more onerous for you. So you have to make sure that you're playing clean football on offense. I think it's also incumbent on Georgia Tech to get a couple of turnovers as well. That's part of their defensive DNA. They take a lot of pride in their takeaways, and I think they'll need to deliver in the turnover margin if they want to win. Like I said earlier, Trey, you got to capitalize inside the red zone. It has not been Georgia Tech's forte. I think it'll need to be if they want to win. And, at the end of the day, you have to be able to weather adversity, because Virginia's going to keep throwing. That there's no secret. And so you can't allow yourself to get flustered or rattled, even though they might make some tough catches. And Armstrong, as he's plenty capable, it makes some tough throws. And that's where that experience and that poise and that veteran maturity can come in for Georgia Tech. They showed the earmarks of a maturing team with the way they rallied in the final minutes versus Duke after letting a lead slip away. And I think it'll be that same composure and same perseverance that might have to come in handy again at Scott Stadium.
Well, Andy, I want to thank you so much for joining me, taking some time out to preview this game, the first game for the Yellow Jackets against a team from the Commonwealth this season in back-to-back weeks, which is ironic given how unique the challenges both teams have had with the Yellow Jackets and vice versa. But how can Cavalier fans connect with you? Anyone listening can connect with you as they get ready for Saturday?
Well, I'm on Twitter like I think everybody in the free world is. I'm at Andy Demetra. I'm very easy to find. And, check your XM and Sirius listings for where you can listen to our broadcast of the game. But we're also streaming online like every other broadcaster is. So if your ears are so inclined, we'd love your company on Saturday. Looking forward to another fun Saturday night. Always a lively one, it seems, when the Jackets and Cavaliers play ball. I think their last 3 matchups have been decided by 5 points or less. So, be there for the opening kickoff and make sure you stay tuned until the final whistle, because it'll be tightly contested, as this recent series suggests.
So it sounds like you got to take Georgia Tech to cover the 7. Thanks, Andy, for joining us. As always, you can connect with me at Trey Lyle VT and Fastlane Ed Lane, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fast Lane.